Silence swallowed the back entrance of Calabrese's at 11:22 p.m., that particular kind of silence that belongs to empty corridors and places where secrets are kept. Sofia Harper pushed through the service door, and the first thing that registered was not the cold Seattle air streaming through the gap, but the sound of her own breathing, ragged, wet, broken like something inside her chest had cracked beyond repair. She was 29 years old. Tonight, she looked 40. Auburn hair matted against her pale face, so pale it seemed to glow against the darkness. Her left eye swollen completely shut, the bruising spreading in shades of purple and black like watercolor bleeding across canvas. Handprint bruises darkened her throat, 5 fingers and a palm, each one distinct, each one a word spoken in violence. Her split lip dripped blood onto the white marble floor of the private corridor, crimson drops landing like fallen leaves on fresh snow. The torn server uniform hung off one shoulder, the fabric shredded where it had caught on the storage room shelf when Douglas Hale slammed her against it. She could still feel the edge of that shelf digging into her spine. Could still hear his voice, thick with rage and something uglier beneath it, something that smelled like entitlement and years of getting away with whatever he wanted. She collapsed against the mahogany wall near the private booth. That was when the restaurant changed. 3 men in expensive black suits sat in the leather booth, one silver-haired and broad across the shoulders, 2 younger men flanking him like satellites orbiting a sun. The scent of marinara and fresh basil filled the air, mixed now with something else. Copper. Blood. The smell of survival and its opposite. Sergio's hand moved toward his shoulder holster. His fingers were already reaching, already moving on instinct, on the muscle memory of 1,000 threats and 100 actual dangers. But then the silver-haired man raised one finger. Just one. Everything stopped. That man was Giovanni Calabrese. 58 years old, 6'2", with the kind of presence that made rooms reorganize themselves around his presence. His tailored suit cost more than Sofia's monthly rent. His silk tie cost more than her week. The scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone, thin, white, decades old, caught the candlelight when he turned his head. "Help her," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. Like something that could not be broken. Sergio and Dario moved forward, but carefully, the way you move when something fragile is in front of you. Sofia tried to back away. Her body would not obey. Her knees were buckling. The pain in her ribs screamed with every breath. She gasped through broken tissue, through fear, through the knowledge that she had nowhere left to go. "Please," she whispered, and the word came out shattered like glass. "Douglas." The storage room. I told him I was going to report the tips. The stolen tips. He said I was ungrateful. He said I was. Her voice dissolved. Giovanni Calabrese moved faster than a man his size should be able to move. He caught her before she hit the ground, his arms bracing her as her legs gave out completely. And in that moment, something shifted in the restaurant. Something shifted in the world. For 15 years, Marco Enzo, the 2 lieutenants closest to him, had never seen Giovanni Calabrese touch another human being with gentleness. They had seen him order men to disappear. They had seen him negotiate the transfer of entire city blocks like trading cards. They had seen him sit perfectly still while another man wept and begged for mercy. But they had never seen him catch a stranger the way a father catches a child falling from a height. "Get my doctor," Giovanni said quietly. "Tell him to come to the penthouse. Tell him it is urgent." Sergio was already reaching for his phone. Sofia's trembling hand clutched something, a photograph, worn at the edges, creased from being folded and unfolded 1,000 times. The photo fell as her fingers opened involuntarily. Along with it, bills scattered across the marble floor like wounded birds unable to fly. $78. That was all she had left in the world. Dario knelt to collect the money, and when he looked at the photograph, his breath caught. It showed Sofia 5 years younger, standing beside a man with kind eyes and her same auburn hair. They were both smiling. They were both alive. Who was this? Giovanni asked softly, but it was not really a question. My husband, Sofia whispered. Michael. He was a teacher. He died 4 years ago. Cancer. The treatment, we went into debt. I still owe so much. Giovanni did not respond. He simply held her more carefully, the way you hold something that has already been broken and shattered and somehow keeps existing anyway. His men exchanged a look neither had seen in 15 years. In his eyes, something cold and dangerous stirred. Something connected to a 9-year-old version of himself standing in a Naples alley, watching his father's fists fall on his mother's face, learning in that moment that the world does not protect the powerless. Across the dining room, separated by candlelit tables and careful distance, Evelyn Blackwell watched. She was 62 years old, with silver hair styled in the kind of cut that cost $500 every 6 weeks. Her designer dress, black silk that whispered when she moved, had come from Milan. She sat at her corner table the way she sat at every table, like a general surveying a battlefield. In her right hand, a wine glass filled with something that cost more per bottle than Sofia made in a month. In her left hand, her phone. Evelyn had been watching Sofia all evening. She knew exactly why the girl had collapsed into Giovanni's booth. She knew exactly who Douglas Hale was. And more importantly, she knew exactly what Douglas Hale had been doing for the past 2 years, stealing tips that should have gone to the servers, pocketing them in exchange for keeping quiet about Evelyn's own operations. The money laundering. The offshore accounts. The way she had figured out to move millions through restaurants and clubs and luxury shops where cash moved like water, impossible to track, impossible to trace. Douglas Hale was a liability tonight. But Sofia Harper, bleeding, desperate, absolutely alone, was a much bigger problem. Evelyn's manicured fingers tightened around the wine glass until her knuckles turned white. She did not know that this moment, this single instant when Giovanni Calabrese caught a broken woman before she hit the ground, would be the moment everything changed. She did not know that federal agents had been hunting her network for 18 months. She did not know that the photograph now lying on the marble floor, the one showing Sofia's dead husband, would become evidence in a conspiracy charge that would eventually add 15 years to whatever sentence she was about to receive. All she knew was this: something in Giovanni's eyes had transformed. And that transformation was going to destroy her. 3 blocks away, in a basement apartment that smelled like mold and broken dreams, a 7-year-old girl named Emma Harper lay asleep on a mattress that took up most of the bedroom. She had her mother's auburn hair. She had her father's kind eyes. On the pillow beside her head lay a drawing, Emma's drawing, made with crayons that had been worn down to nubs, showing 2 stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. Emma did not know where her mother was tonight. Emma did not know that in a few hours, everything would change. All she knew was that the apartment was cold, and that Mommy had left her with Mrs. Chen next door, and that the light from the hallway kept spilling under the crack in the door like a promise that someone would come back. Back at Calabrese's, Giovanni was carrying Sofia toward the back of the restaurant, toward the private corridor, toward the office where his money lived and his secrets breathed. Sergio was already on the phone with the doctor. Dario was collecting the scattered bills with careful hands, treating each one like a holy relic. "What is your name?" Giovanni asked. "Sofia," she whispered. "Sofia Harper." "Sofia," he repeated, and the way he said it, it was not just a name. It was a promise. "You are not alone anymore." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to, but she did not know who he was. Did not know that the restaurant she worked for, Calabrese's, the place where she made minimum wage and had her tip stolen and was called ungrateful when she asked for what was owed, belonged to a man whose name alone silenced rooms. Whose childhood in Naples taught him that poverty and violence are cousins. Whose entire life was built on a single principle: those under his protection would never suffer as he once had. Sofia did not know any of this when Giovanni laid her gently on the sofa in his office. She did not know that by dawn, everything would be different. By dawn, the FBI would raid the restaurant at 6:13 a.m. with 16 agents in tactical gear. By dawn, Douglas Hale would be led out in handcuffs, screaming denials that would be heard by every neighbor on the block, broadcast on every news channel, captured on footage that would spread across the internet like wildfire. By dawn, Evelyn Blackwell's penthouse accounts would be frozen. By dawn, she would be facing 40 years in federal prison for conspiracy and racketeering and a dozen other charges that would stack up like stones, each one heavier than the last. But that was later. First came the rain. The November wind tore through the empty streets like a blade wrapped in ice. Sofia Harper walked along Highway 99 outside Seattle at 5:17 p.m., her body bent forward against the blizzard, snow slashing horizontal across the road in waves so thick she could barely see 10 feet ahead. 2 plastic grocery bags hung from each hand, their thin handles cutting into her palms, groceries shifting with every step, rice, beans, the cheapest cuts of chicken that would stretch across 7 days of meals for 2 children who were always hungry. For miles. She had walked for miles from the discount mart because her ancient Toyota had died 2 weeks ago, and the repair quote was $1,200 she did not have. $1,200. The number lived in her head like a curse. She had been counting money her entire life, and the counting never stopped. It only changed which numbers haunted her. The snow crunched beneath her shoes. Through the white chaos, she could see the temperature on a bank sign, 9 degrees and dropping. Her fingers had stopped hurting an hour ago, which meant they were close to frostbite. Her thin jacket, purchased 6 years ago from a thrift store, the zipper broken on the left side, could not hold heat. She was burning through her body's reserves like a candle in the wind, and she knew exactly how much longer she could survive this. But Emma and Luca were waiting. Mrs. Chen's apartment was on the 5th floor of a building that smelled like cooking oil and mold. Sofia paid her $15 a day to watch the twins after school. $15. That was 2 hours of her wage before taxes, before the tips that Douglas Hale had been stealing from her apron for the past 8 months. She had calculated it once, over $1,900 missing. $1,900 that could have fixed the car. Could have paid the deposit on a new apartment. Could have given her children something other than canned soup for dinner. The phone in her pocket buzzed. She did not need to look to know who it was. She already knew. Douglas Hale. The manager of Calabrese's, the upscale Italian restaurant where she worked 6 nights a week, where she served tables filled with people who left tips larger than her hourly wage, tips that somehow never made it to her apron. She read the text anyway, her eye squinting against the snow, "You're closing tonight. Be here by 9. Don't be late." This was the 3rd double shift he had forced on her this week. No overtime pay. Just threats, always threats, delivered with a smile. Complain and you're fired. Try me. She had threatened to report him to the health inspector last week, threatened, not even done it yet, and ever since, he had been punishing her with extra shifts, with public humiliation in front of the other servers, with his hand on her shoulder lasting just a moment too long. She typed back with frozen fingers, "I'll be there." Because she had no choice. Because if she lost this job, she lost the roof over her children's heads. Because rent was $420, due in 3 days, and she had $78 to her name. 78. She had counted it this morning while Emma and Luca slept, spreading the bills and coins across the kitchen table like a poker hand she was losing. The wind shrieked. Her foot caught on black ice hidden beneath the fresh snow. Her body pitched forward. The grocery bags flew from her hands, scattering, an apple rolling across the frozen ground, a bag of rice tearing open, white grains mixing with snow. She landed hard on her hip, the impact driving the breath from her lungs. She lay there for 30 seconds, snow piling on her face, filling her ears, the wind howling like something dying. Then she got up. Kept walking. She gathered what she could of the groceries. The apple was gone, lost to the darkness. Half the rice scattered. But she salvaged the chicken, the beans, the bread. She kept moving because stopping meant death, and her children needed her alive. At 6:43 p.m., through the whiteout, she saw lights. 3 black SUVs appeared like ships emerging from fog, driving slow through the storm. They passed her, then brake lights flared red in the snow. The lead vehicle reversed. A window rolled down with an electric hum. A man in a charcoal suit and an overcoat leaned out, late 30s, dark eyes, a scar along his left cheekbone. Sergio. She did not know his name yet. "Lady, you're gonna freeze to death out here," he said. His voice was rough, the accent faintly Italian. "Need a ride?" Sofia shook her head, backing away. "I'm fine, thank you." But her teeth were chattering so violently she could barely form words. Ice crystals had formed in her hair. Her lips were numb. The rear door of the middle SUV opened. Another man stood there, even larger than the first, with a neck like a tree trunk. "Dario. Boss says get in. Storm's only getting worse." She hesitated. Every survival instinct screamed at her, "Do not get into cars with strange men, do not trust anyone in this city, trust only yourself because everyone else will take what little you have." But the temperature was 9 degrees. She could not feel her toes. The walk to Mrs. Chen's apartment was still 2 miles away. She climbed in. The interior was warm. Heated leather seats. The air smelled like expensive cologne and the ghost of cigar smoke. In the back seat sat a man in his mid-40s, wearing a charcoal suit tailored so precisely it must have cost thousands. His hair was salt and pepper, dark at the temples, silver threading through the sides. A scar ran from the corner of his left eye to his jawline, thin and pale like a knife had once traced that path. His eyes were storm grey, the color of a sky before catastrophe. He watched her climb in without expression. Giovanni Calabrese. She did not know this yet. Did not know that the man sitting 3 feet away owned the restaurant where she worked, owned the building where she was about to pick up her children, owned half the legitimate businesses and all of the invisible ones in Seattle. She only knew that he was dangerous the way a sleeping predator is dangerous, not from any movement, but from the complete and utter stillness. The way he Saturday. The way he breathed. The way his eyes moved across her face and saw something. "Where to?" he asked. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. Like something that, once spoken, could not be unsaid. Sofia gave him the address of Mrs. Chen's building. Her voice came out small, a whisper barely audible above the idling engine. "Thank you for stopping." He nodded once and said something to Sergio in rapid Italian, words she did not understand, and the convoy began moving again through the blizzard. She sat clutching her grocery bags, the plastic handles cutting into her hands, avoiding eye contact. Outside the window, the city blurred into white and shadow. She was acutely aware of every movement around her, Dario's breathing, the leather creaking beneath her weight, the occasional sound of an engine in the distance, swallowed quickly by the storm. Giovanni turned slightly to look at her. His eyes fell to her hands, to the photo that had slipped from her jacket pocket, half hidden in the shadows between the seats. The photograph of Michael, her husband, taken 6 years ago at a beach in Oregon. He was smiling. He had been smiling the moment the drunk driver crossed the center line. "How long?" Giovanni asked quietly. 2 years, she whispered. "Car accident." She nodded. He was coming home from work. Wrong place. Wrong time. He studied her for a long moment, really studied her, the way someone examines a piece of art or a wound. His gaze traveled across her threadbare jacket, her worn shoes with the sole separating on the left one, her fingers that were beginning to thaw and throb with pins and needles pain. He saw the exhaustion in her face, the kind that does not come from one bad day or one bad week but from an accumulation of bad days, years stacked upon each other like stones. "You work at my restaurant," he said. Not a question. Her eyes widened. "Yes, sir." "Calabrese's." "I'm a server." "Thank you for the ride, Mr. Calabrese." She knew his name because she had heard the other servers whisper it with a mixture of awe and fear. Calabrese. The owner. The man who came through maybe once a month, always in a perfectly tailored suit, always accompanied by men in dark clothing, always inspecting the restaurant with the expression of a general surveying a battlefield. She had never spoken to him before. "I've seen you," he said simply. You're always there. Double shifts. Always staying past closing to finish your work even though you are not paid for it. She did not know how he knew this. Did not know that he noticed everything about his businesses, every detail, every person. That his mind was a ledger that recorded debts and favors, kindnesses and betrayals. My car broke down 2 weeks ago, she said quietly. I've been taking the bus, then walking the rest of the way. He said nothing. But something shifted in his expression. Something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest, though he showed no sign of it. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His hands, which had been resting on his thighs, formed into fists and then slowly released. The convoy wound through the snowy streets. At 7:04 p.m., they pulled in front of Mrs. Chen's apartment building. Sofia gathered her groceries and prepared to climb out, her heart racing for reasons she could not articulate. As she turned to close the door, Giovanni pressed a card into her hand. It was black with silver lettering, a phone number, nothing else. For tonight, he said. Sergio will drive you to Calabrese's. The storm is not safe. And when your shift ends, he will drive you home. This is not a question. She held the card, trembling. Mr. Calabrese, I don't want to be any trouble. You are not trouble, he said quietly. Do as I have asked. She nodded and stepped out into the blizzard. What she did not know was that, at this exact moment, Douglas Hale was in the restaurant storage room, counting the tips he had stolen from the servers' aprons. $237 taken just today. He was thinking about Sofia Harper, about the way she had looked at him last week when she told him she was going to report his theft to the health inspector. About the insolence in her voice. About how she needed to be reminded of her place. He was planning how to punish her. The blizzard outside transformed the streets into a landscape of white silence. Sofia Harper sat in the back seat of the black SUV, her hands trembling as she held the silver-lettered card. Sergio drove without speaking, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, the windshield wipers beating a steady rhythm against the falling snow. At 8:02 p.m., the restaurant appeared through the storm like a beacon, Calabrese's, all warm candlelight and elegance, the kind of place where people spent more on a single meal than Sofia spent on groceries in a month. Sergio pulled around to the staff entrance. Sofia gathered her things, her heart racing for reasons she still could not name. The moment she stepped out into the frozen air, she saw him. Douglas Hale. Standing at the service door with his arms crossed, his face already flushed with anger. You're late, he said, his voice sharp as a knife. Sofia checked her phone. 8:52 p.m. You said my shift started at 9. The card said. Don't talk back to me. His hand shot out, grabbing her upper arm, squeezing hard enough to leave marks. And who the hell dropped you off? That wasn't one of the restaurant cars. A friend, Sofia whispered. Douglas's eyes narrowed. He yanked her inside, through the kitchen where the smell of basil and wood smoke hung heavy in the air, past the line cooks who pretended not to see. He shoved her toward the service station. You work your shift. You keep your mouth shut. And you never, ever get in a car with anyone without my permission again. Understood? She nodded, too frightened to speak. The restaurant was nearly empty that night. The blizzard had kept most customers home. Only a handful of tables held diners, their conversations muted, intimate. Sofia tied her apron with shaking hands and took her section. That was when she saw them. In the private booth at the back of the restaurant, 2 children sat coloring with crayons. A boy and a girl, perhaps 6 years old, identical dark curls framing serious brown eyes. They communicated entirely through glances and gestures, passing crayons back and forth with the silent choreography of twins who had learned to speak without words. Sofia had heard the kitchen staff whisper about them. Those kids don't talk. Not a single word since birth. Boss took them to doctors in New York, Boston, Chicago. Specialists said there's nothing physically wrong with them. Something up here, one of the cooks had said, tapping his temple. Something in their minds that won't let the words come out. The little girl looked up. Her brown eyes met Sofia's for a moment, steady and clear. Then she lifted her small hand and gave a tiny wave. Sofia waved back, feeling something shift inside her chest, a connection that needed no words, that existed in the space between grief and recognition. She understood silence. She had been silent for so long, swallowing her own voice to keep her job, to keep a roof over her children's heads, to keep herself invisible. The night wore on. Sofia moved through her section on autopilot, taking orders, delivering plates, clearing tables. The snow continued to fall outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, accumulating in drifts that made the city beyond the glass look like a photograph from another world. At 10:15 p.m., the restaurant had emptied completely except for the Calabrese twins and a few lingering tables. Sofia was wiping down the bar when Douglas appeared beside her, his presence like a storm gathering. He glanced around, saw that the main dining room was nearly clear, and jerked his head toward the back. Storage room. Now. Sofia's stomach dropped. She followed him through the kitchen, past the walk-in cooler, into the narrow storage room lined with boxes of olive oil and imported pasta. Douglas closed the door behind them. The sound of the latch clicking shut was like a coffin lid sealing. "I know what you did," he hissed, stepping closer. His breath smelled like whiskey. "You told Maria about the tip skimming, didn't you? You went running to her with your little accusations about theft and illegal overtime." "I just said that employees deserve their full tips," Sofia said, backing away. "It's the law." "I didn't." His hand closed around her throat. Not gently. With the full force of his rage. He slammed her back against the metal shelves so hard the boxes rattled. Her vision exploded into white spots. "You think you're smarter than me," he said, his face inches from hers. "You think you can threaten me? I'm connected to people you don't even know exist. Evelyn Blackwell and I have a business arrangement that makes both of us very, very rich. And you're a nobody. A waitress with 2 kids and $78 in her pocket. You think anyone cares what happens to you?" Sofia clawed at his hands, gasping for air. Her fingers found no purchase on his skin. Stars multiplied in her vision. "Report me," he continued, squeezing harder, "and I'll make one phone call. 1. I'll tell child services you're using drugs, that you're an unfit mother. They'll take your kids so fast your head will spin. And you'll never see them again." He released her. Sofia collapsed, her lungs burning as she gasped for breath. Before she could orient herself, he grabbed her hair, yanked her upright, and threw her sideways against the corner of the shelf unit. Her head connected with the sharp metal edge. Pain exploded through her skull. Warm blood ran down her face, dripping onto her white server's shirt. Douglas straightened his tie, smoothed his hair back, and walked out as if nothing had happened. The door swung shut behind him. Sofia lay there for 2 minutes, or maybe 5, she could not measure time anymore. The storage room spun around her. She touched her split lip, felt the swelling already beginning around her left eye. Her ribs screamed with pain when she tried to breathe. She had never been hit like that before. Not by Douglas. Not by anyone. She thought about her children at home with Mrs. Chen. Emma, 7 years old, who asked every morning if Mommy was coming home. Marcus, 9, who had learned to microwave his own dinner so she wouldn't have to pay for aftercare. She thought about the eviction notice taped to her apartment door, 3 days until she and her children would be on the street. She thought about the $35,000 she needed and the $78 in her apron pocket. And she made a decision that would change everything. Sofia used the storage room sink to wash the blood from her hands and face. She looked at herself in the dim, scratched mirror, a woman she barely recognized anymore. Then she tied her apron back on and returned to the dining room. She would finish her shift. She would take her tips, however few they would be. And tomorrow she would find a lawyer, report everything, and let the consequences fall where they may. She did not see Evelyn Blackwell sitting alone at a corner table, watching her with eyes like chips of ice. She did not see Evelyn pull out her phone and text Douglas a single message, "Finish this tonight. Permanently. I don't care how." Sofia moved through the remaining tables, her movements now mechanical, each breath a small knife in her ribs. The twins were still in the private booth, coloring, patient and quiet. The little girl, Emma, looked up as Sofia passed. There was something in her expression, not pity, but recognition. As if this child could sense that Sofia understood what it meant to live in silence, to hurt in places no one could see. At 11:22 p.m., after her shift had officially ended, Sofia gathered her apron to count her tips in the break room. $47. $47 for 6 hours of work, her face beginning to bruise, her ribs screaming, everything inside her breaking apart. She was reaching for her coat when she heard voices, Sergio's calm tone, then Douglas's voice, angry and rising. Sofia froze. "Mr. Calabrese is asking to see Sofia," Sergio said, his voice carrying a note of something Sofia had never heard directed at Douglas. It sounded like danger. "She's off the clock," Douglas snapped back. "Whatever he wants can wait until her next shift." But Sofia did not wait. She walked toward the sound of the voices, toward the dining room, and that was when she saw him. Giovanni Calabrese stood near the private booth where his twin Saturday. He was tall, over 6 feet, with the kind of presence that made the air around him seem to compress. Expensive black suit, white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, dark eyes that miss nothing. And when those eyes landed on Sofia, when he saw her swollen face and the way she moved like someone in pain, something in his expression changed. Something cold and dangerous, like a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. "Sofia," he said, his voice deep and solid like an oath. "Come sit. We need to talk about what happened to you tonight." At 1:51 a.m., the temperature in the restaurant dropped 10 degrees. Douglas Hale stood frozen, watching Sofia Harper sit across from Giovanni Calabrese in the private booth, the twins coloring quietly beside her. His face went purple. The vein in his temple pulsed like a warning. "You're still here." Douglas moved toward her, his voice sharp as broken glass. "I told you to leave. Your shift ended an hour ago." Giovanni stood. The movement was slow, deliberate, the way a predator rises from rest. He was tall, over 6 feet, with a kind of presence that made the air compress around him. Expensive black suit, white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, dark eyes that saw everything. "You put your hands on her," Giovanni said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, but underneath it ran something else. Something cold and dangerous, like a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. Douglas laughed. It came out nervous, desperate. "I have no idea what she told you." She fell. Hit her head on the storage shelf. These things happen in a restaurant. People are clumsy. Giovanni moved faster than a man his size should be able to. His hand shot out, wrapped around Douglas's throat, and slammed him against the marble wall, exactly the way Douglas had done to Sofia hours earlier. The impact echoed through the empty dining room. "You left handprints," Giovanni said, his voice never rising above a whisper, which somehow made it worse. "On her throat. On her face. Your hand size. Want me to check if they match?" Douglas choked, his fingers clawing at Giovanni's grip. His face darkened from purple to black. "You can't." "Evelyn will. We have lawyers, federal protection for witnesses in there." He stopped. The words hung in the air like poison. Giovanni released him. Douglas collapsed to the floor, gasping, his lungs burning with the need for air. "Federal protection." Giovanni stepped back, adjusting his cufflinks with the calm of a man who had just done nothing more violent than pour a drink. "What are you a witness to, Douglas?" Sergio and Dario moved silently into position, blocking both exits. They had been standing at attention since the moment their boss's expression changed. 15 years working for Giovanni Calabrese had taught them to recognize the moment before everything ended. Giovanni pulled out his phone. His finger moved across the screen with precision. Then, the sound of his own voice filled the restaurant, a recording, crystal clear, captured by the security system he had installed in every corner of his establishment. The voices were Evelyn Blackwell's and Douglas Hale's, recorded 2 hours earlier in the back office. Evelyn's voice, smooth as silk and twice as cold. Douglas, I cannot have hysterical employees making false claims to the authorities. This entire operation depends on discretion. Sofia Harper is becoming a liability. Douglas, nervous, eager to please, I handled it. She won't be a problem anymore. Evelyn, you'd better be right. The Volkovs are getting impatient. We have $17 million moving through those restaurant supply chains this quarter. If an investigation starts because some waitress decides to be a hero, we all burn. And believe me, Douglas, the Russians burn slower than Giovanni Calabrese ever could. Giovanni stopped the recording. I record everything in my restaurant, he said quietly. Security measure. Now talk. Tell me everything, or I feed you to people who will do it for entertainment. Douglas trembled like a cornered animal caught in a corner with no escape. The words tumbled out, desperate and broken. You don't understand. She made me do it. Evelyn Blackwell has connections with the Volkov family, Russian organized crime out of Portland. They've been laundering money through restaurant supply chains up and down the entire West Coast for 3 years. She needed my access to your books, your vendors, your shipping manifests. I just skimmed tips, the small amounts, to make the whole thing look like penny anti-theft. Keeps the authorities focused on petty crimes while the real money moves through. Sofia listened from the booth, her hands pressed against her mouth. Emma watched her with those dark, intelligent eyes. The FBI? Giovanni asked. They know, Douglas gasped. They've been investigating for 18 months. Evelyn promised me immunity if I testified against the Volkovs. Federal protection, new identity, everything. But then Sofia started noticing discrepancies in the numbers. Started asking questions about the supplies that never arrived, the orders that didn't match the invoices. She was going to report me for the tip theft, and if she did, the FBI's entire case could collapse because I'd be exposed as unreliable. Evelyn said to handle it quietly. She said if Sofia Harper disappeared or recanted her story, nobody would ever know. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the sound of the restaurant's old VAC system seemed to stop. Giovanni pulled out his phone. The number he dialed connected on the first ring, even at this hour. Someone had been waiting for this call. Special Agent Chen? It's Giovanni Calabrese. We spoke last year about cooperation. I have something for you. He put the phone on speaker. A woman's voice, sharp and alert. Mr. Calabrese, it's almost 2 in the morning. This better be significant. Douglas Hale just confessed to conspiracy in the Volkov money laundering operation, Giovanni said. His partner is Evelyn Blackwell. I have recordings of her voice ordering the assault on an innocent employee. I have documentation of $18 million in illicit transfers. How fast can you get here? 3 seconds of silence. Don't let them leave, Agent Chen said. We'll be there in 20 minutes. We're calling in the Seattle field office. Stay on the line. Douglas tried to run. Dario moved like water, smooth and inevitable. His arm came up, caught Douglas across the chest, and Douglas flew backward, crashing to the floor with his arm bent at an angle that suggested it would never bend that way again. The sound of something breaking was sharp and final. Douglas screamed. Giovanni did not look at him. He was watching Sofia instead. Get the children upstairs, he said to Sergio. The penthouse. Stay with them. This place is about to become a federal crime scene. But Sofia did not move. She sat in the booth, watching the FBI agent swarm through the restaurant doors 20 minutes later, watching Douglas Hale being handcuffed despite his shattered arm, watching her entire world transform in real time. The adrenaline began to wear off, and what replaced it was far worse. Emptiness. Realization. The full weight of the night crashed down on her like a falling building. She stood, walked through the crowd of federal agents in dark windbreakers, and stepped into the Seattle night. The November wind tore through the empty street like a blade wrapped in ice. Snow had begun to fall, heavy and thick, each flake landing and sticking to her hair, her face, her blood-stained waitress uniform. 2 blocks away, police lights were already beginning to flash. News vans were en route. By sunrise, this story would be everywhere. Sofia walked to the edge of the sidewalk and stopped. The street stretched before her, dark and empty. She thought about her husband, the photo in her apron pocket now stained with her own blood. 2 years. She had been surviving instead of living for 2 years, ever since the infection after his surgery took him. $47 to her name. $35,000 in debt in 3 days. A job that had nearly killed her tonight. She was so cold she could not feel her fingers. The wind pulled at her coat. 1 step toward the street. Then another. A small voice behind her broke the sound of the wind. No go. Stay. Sofia turned. Emma stood in the restaurant doorway, shivering in her coat, Luca beside her. 2 6-year-old children who had been born unable to speak, who had just found their voices for the first time in their lives tonight, looking at her with terrified eyes. Emma ran forward, grabbed Sofia's hand. You stay. We need you. Daddy needs you. Sofia picked up Emma, took Luca's hand, and walked back inside. The penthouse at 6:13 a.m. was chaos. Federal agents in tactical gear swarmed the luxury building. Special Agent Chen, sharp-eyed and relentless, executed search warrants simultaneously on Douglas Hale and Evelyn Blackwell. Douglas Hale was led out in handcuffs, still screaming about his immunity agreement, his broken arm in an emergency cast, his face blurred by tears and rage. News cameras flashed outside, someone had tipped off the media. His mugshot appeared on every channel by 4:15 a.m. The Seattle Times, the Morning News, every outlet from Portland to Tacoma ran the headline, "Local restaurant manager arrested in racketeering conspiracy." But Evelyn Blackwell's arrest was what sent shockwaves through the entire Pacific Northwest criminal underworld. At 6:13 a.m., federal agents in black SUVs, 15 of them, moving like a coordinated machine, pulled up to her penthouse in the Columbia Center. Evelyn Blackwell, 63 years old, with perfect platinum hair and a designer wardrobe worth more than Sofia's entire life, was led out in handcuffs. Her silk robe fell open. Her hair was disheveled. Her face was a mask of fury and disbelief. The reporters screamed questions. "Mrs. Blackwell, is it true you've been laundering money for Russian organized crime? Did you order the assault on Sofia Harper? How much money moved through your operation?" "This is a mistake," Evelyn shrieked at the cameras. "I'm a respected businesswoman. I have lawyers. I have immunity." But the evidence told a different story. $18 million in illicit transfers traced through her accounts. 23 separate wire fraud charges. Conspiracy. Racketeering. Money laundering. And because Douglas had eventually cooperated, after his wrist was reset and he realized that federal prison might be preferable to what Giovanni Calabrese would do to him, conspiracy to commit aggravated assault and attempted murder for hire. Federal prosecutors announced Evelyn Blackwell was facing 48 years in federal prison. No parole. No early release. Her assets were frozen, or the penthouse, the cars, the offshore accounts, all seized immediately and liquidated to compensate victims. Too quick, too easy, too merciful would have been a bullet. This was systematic destruction. Evelyn Blackwell would spend the rest of her life in a concrete cell, stripped of everything except the knowledge of her own failure. The woman who had built her empire on invisible suffering would now experience nothing but isolation. Sofia watched the broadcast in the restaurant's dining room as dawn broke. Giovanni stood beside her, his hand resting gently on her back. His expression was unreadable, but his jaw was tight. "People who prey on the vulnerable think power makes them untouchable," he said quietly. "But real power is knowing when to burn it all down to protect one person who matters." Sofia looked at him. Why did you help me? Really? He glanced toward the stairs, where his twins were sleeping now in the penthouse above. Because 20 years ago I was 9 years old in Naples, watching my father beat my mother. I was too small to stop him. I swore if I ever had power, I'd use it differently. You gave my children their voices tonight. That's a debt I can never repay. But what Sofia did not know was that the transformation was only beginning. The real miracle was still unfolding, waiting just beyond the horizon, where after the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. 1 year had passed since the dawn broke over Seattle and federal agents led Douglas Hale out in handcuffs across every news channel. 1 year since Evelyn Blackwell's penthouse accounts froze and her entire empire collapsed like a building with its foundation removed. 1 year since Sofia Harper stood in the ruins of her old life and chose to rebuild. The penthouse overlooked the city from the 42nd floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the entire eastern wall, and the skyline glittered below like someone had scattered diamonds across black velvet. Sofia stood at that window at 8:34 p.m. on a clear spring evening, wearing an elegant navy dress that fit her perfectly now, no longer borrowed from donation boxes, no longer hanging loose from a frame worn down by hunger and fear. Her hair was styled professionally, falling in waves past her shoulders. Her face was free of bruises. Her eyes held something they hadn't held a year ago, peace. Behind her, Emma and Luca Calabrese were 7 years old now. Both of them spoke in full sentences. Both of them attended Seattle Academy, where they read aloud in class without hesitation, where their teachers reported they were among the brightest in their grade. Emma had become obsessed with mathematics. Luca loved history. Neither of them remembered the silence that once defined their world. Sofia's own children played video games with the twins in the next room, their laughter echoing through the apartment like a song that had been missing for years. A reliable Honda Civic sat in the building's garage below, paid for with her own salary. Health insurance card sat in her wallet. Private school tuition was no longer a mathematical impossibility that made her chest tighten. The $35,000 she had owed, the amount that had felt like a mountain she could never climb, she had paid back in 8 months through careful work and careful saving, refusing to let Giovanni's wealth become a substitute for her own dignity. She had spent the year as Giovanni's executive assistant and family coordinator, managing his transition from underworld operations to fully legitimate business. During the day she ran spreadsheets and attended board meetings. During the evenings she helped the children with homework, braided Emma's hair, listened to Luca read aloud from whatever historical book had captured his imagination. She had enrolled in an MBA program online, funded by Giovanni but earned through her own relentless work. She attended classes at 11 p.m. after the children slept, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee growing cold beside her laptop, refusing to fail. But something had shifted between her and Giovanni over these 12 months. Long conversations after the children slept, when they would sit on this very balcony and talk about everything from his childhood in Naples to her dreams for her own education. Shared looks across the dinner table that lasted a second too long. A hand brushing her shoulder when he passed, lingering a moment more than necessary. An unspoken tension neither had acknowledged, as if speaking it aloud might shatter something fragile and newly formed. The balcony door opened behind her. Giovanni stepped out into the spring evening, wearing a tailored black suit that cost more than Sofia's entire wardrobe had cost a year ago. His hair had grown slightly longer, salt and pepper at the temples, and something about him looked softer than it had before, less weight pressing down on his shoulders, less hardness around the eyes. The scar that ran from his left eye to his cheekbone caught the city lights as he turned toward her. He stood beside her at the railing, close enough that she could feel his warmth in the cool evening air, but not quite touching. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The city hummed below them, distant traffic, the whisper of wind through the high-rises, the sound of Seattle breathing in the darkness. "Beautiful view," he said finally, his voice deep and solid like an oath. "It is," she agreed, and she was not looking at the city. He turned to face her then, his eyes meeting hers. Something in his expression shifted, something she had seen flicker across his face a dozen times this year but never fully acknowledged. A year ago tonight, Giovanni said quietly. You stumbled into my restaurant bleeding and desperate with $78 in your pocket. You were terrified and broken, but you still had the strength to care about my children when you couldn't even care for yourself. You gave them their voices, Sofia. You changed everything. She felt her throat tighten. You saved my life. You gave me a future when I had nothing. No, he said, shaking his head slowly. I gave you tools. Everything you've built this year, your education, your career, the strength in your voice now, that's all you. You saved yourself. I just refused to let you do it alone. The Seattle wind moved across the balcony, carrying the smell of rain that had fallen earlier, that clean cold scent that made everything feel new. Somewhere inside the apartment, the children's laughter erupted suddenly, then faded. Giovanni took a breath. His jaw tightened for a moment, as if he was gathering courage. I need to tell you something I've carried for a year, he said. Something I've been afraid to say because I didn't want to complicate what we've built here, what matters most, the children, the family, the peace we've found. But I can't carry it anymore. Sofia's breath caught. Her hand moved to the railing, gripping it lightly. I'm in love with you, Giovanni said, and the words fell between them like stones into still water. I have been since the moment you smiled at my children through a split lip and told them you were okay, even though you weren't. I've watched you rebuild yourself into someone extraordinary this year, and every single day I fall deeper. I see you at board meetings commanding rooms of men twice your age. I see you tucking Emma into bed and singing to her in Italian. I see you helping Luca with his history essay, and your face lights up when he understands something new. You are the most remarkable woman I've ever known. He paused, and when he spoke again his voice was quieter. But I need you to know something, and I need you to believe it. You don't owe me anything. Not gratitude, not obligation, not affection. The job offer from that tech company has been sitting on your desk for 3 weeks. If you want to take it, if you want to build your own empire separate from mine, if you want to move on and live your own life, I will support that with everything I am. I will always support you. You are free, Sofia. You have been free since the moment you walked out of that restaurant a year ago. But I had to tell you the truth, I love you. That's all. Just that. Sofia felt tears spill across her cheeks. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands, feeling the warmth of his skin, the slight roughness of his jaw. I love you too, she whispered. I was afraid to say it because I thought maybe it was just gratitude, or safety, or relief. But it's not. It's you. The way you protect your children like they're the most precious thing in existence. The way you used your power to deliver justice instead of revenge. The way you see me as an equal, not a project or a charity case. I love you, Giovanni Calabrese. I love your broken pieces and your dangerous edges and your terrifying gentleness. I love you. He kissed her then, soft and careful and full of promise, as the Seattle skyline glittered around them like the world itself was celebrating. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. Your children will always be my children too, she said. All 4 of them. We're a family now. A real one. Not because of obligation but because we chose each other. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her. After the rain, the sky clears, he said, and she could feel him smiling against her hair. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. They stood together on that balcony, the city breathing beneath them, neither of them aware that inside the apartment all 4 children were watching from the doorway with enormous grins spread across their faces. Emma ran forward and threw her arms around both of them. Finally, she shouted. We've been waiting forever for you 2 to kiss. Luca said you'd do it tonight, but I wasn't sure. Luca nodded with the seriousness of a man negotiating international treaties. We had a very specific bet. I said tonight. Emma said next week. I win. Sofia, you owe me ice cream. Sofia laughed, a real laugh that came from somewhere deep and healed inside her, and scooped both twins into her arms. Giovanni wrapped his arms around all of them, and for a moment they stood there as a unit, a family forged not by blood but by choice and courage and the refusal to let darkness win. The family gathered for dinner an hour later, the table laden with pasta and fresh bread and wine for the adults and juice for the children. They talked and laughed, and the camera would have pulled back to show the warmth and light inside contrasted with the dark city beyond the windows. But what they did not know was that this ending was just the beginning of a new chapter, one built on truth and healing and the impossible miracle of two children who found their voices through one woman's courage. 6 months later, Sofia walked down an aisle lined with her closest friends. Her children stood beside her in matching dresses. Emma scattered flowers with intense concentration. Luca waited at the altar holding the rings, his small face serious with responsibility. Giovanni stood in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, and when she reached him, tears streamed freely down his face, something his men had never witnessed in 15 years of service. "I do," Sofia said, her voice steady and strong and absolutely certain. Federal courtroom. Douglas Hale stood before a judge in an orange prison jumpsuit, stripped of his dignity, broken and defeated. The judge's gavel came down like a thunderclap, 12 years for assault, conspiracy, and obstruction. He was led away, his shoulders hunched, his power evaporated. In a federal prison 300 miles away, Evelyn Blackwell mopped prison floors in a grey jumpsuit, stripped of every designer label, every connection, every thread of prestige. The television in the visiting room announced her sentence, displayed it like a truth she could never escape: 40 years. No parole. No possibility of early release. The woman who had built an empire on invisible suffering now experienced nothing but isolation. Sofia's office at Calabrese Enterprises displayed her name on the door in silver letters: Sofia Calabrese, Chief Operations Officer. She implemented fair wage policies across every one of Giovanni's companies. She personally trained managers on harassment prevention. She became the advocate she had desperately needed when she was drowning. At bedtime, Giovanni and Sofia sat on the edge of the children's bed, all four of them tucked under soft quilts, the nightlight casting stars across the ceiling. "Tell the story again," Emma whispered. "About how Mommy Sofia saved us." Giovanni's hand found Sofia's in the darkness. "Once upon a time," he began, his voice like velvet, "there was a brave woman who had nothing except courage and love. When she met two children who couldn't speak and a man who had forgotten how to feel, she taught them all what it means to be family. And they lived happily ever after," Luca added, his eyes already closing. Sofia kissed both twins on their foreheads. "We're living it right now," she whispered. The final shot would have shown them on the penthouse balcony at dawn, watching the sunrise paint Seattle in shades of gold and rose. Sofia leaned against Giovanni, his arms wrapped around her, both of them at peace in a way that only comes after surviving the darkness. A year ago, Sofia Harper had $78 and 2 children and no hope. She thought powerful people always won and people like her always lost. She learned something different. Real power isn't measured in money or connections. It's the choice to show courage when you're terrified. It's the decision to offer kindness when the world demands cruelty. It's the commitment to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Douglas Hale and Evelyn Blackwell had wealth and influence, and they used it to destroy. Giovanni Calabrese had even more power, and he chose to build instead. That's the difference between a monster and a hero. If this story moved your heart, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs to remember that one act of courage can change everything. Subscribe and turn on notifications because tomorrow we have another story that will restore your faith in humanity. What would you do if you had the power to save someone? Tell us in the comments. You are stronger than you know, and your story isn't over yet. The best chapter might be just beginning. After the rain, the sky clears. We will see you in the next video.